never thought my life would implode on a Tuesday, yet there I was, staring at the notice of layoff email blinking mockingly at me on my laptop screen, my hands trembling so badly I could barely click delete. 55 years old, decades of work behind me, and now the company that had promised loyalty was tossing me out like a broken office chair. I sank into my leather chair, feeling the weight of every unpaid bill, every whispered late-night worry about retirement funds, crashing down like a tidal wave. And as if the universe were scripting some cruel dark comedy, my phone buzzed, a text from Lila, my daughter, frantic and panicked, telling me she had discovered something about her father. Tom. My Tom. My husband of 30 years, the man who swore he loved me, had apparently been siphoning thousands of dollars from our joint accounts into some offshore venture under the guise of investments, and worse, he had someone else, a younger woman with bright lipstick and a smile that made me want to scream, living in our guest house. The walls that I once thought were a sanctuary suddenly seemed paper thin, and for a moment, I wanted to throw the laptop, the phone, and maybe even myself out the window. But then I heard the faintest knock at the door, and it was Lila, tears streaking her cheeks, mascara running like a river down her pale face, holding her engagement ring box in one hand, her other hand trembling as if she had just run a marathon. "Mom, he's been hiding everything. All the money. And he's with her. And I think he's trying to drag me into some scam. I don't know what to do." Her voice shook, a mix of fear, anger, and hurt, and my heart cracked in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. I held her close, feeling her small body quake against mine, and I realized that the last 30 years of marriage, of laboring for security, of believing in Tom, had left us exposed and vulnerable, like we were both standing naked in the storm with nothing to hold on to. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I scoured bank statements, tried to log into hidden accounts, and discovered not just missing thousands, but evidence that Tom had been investing in a company that didn't exist, a complete scam, and that Lila's own fiancé, Marcus, had unknowingly been roped into a multi-level marketing scheme tied to the same company. I felt my stomach turn, ball rising as panic clawed its way into every thought. I wanted to scream at Tom, but I also knew he would vanish before I could confront him. Rage surged inside me, hot, poisonous, desperate, and then, just as quickly, a hollow sense of despair took over, leaving me shaking and dizzy. The next day, I called the bank, flagged the accounts, and spent hours on hold with representatives whose scripted apologies and perfunctory "we'll look into it" lines did nothing to quell my rising panic. Angela, a coworker from the office who had always been a thorn in my side, sent a congratulatory text about my new opportunity in freedom, and I wanted to hurl my coffee at her face, but instead I recorded the number to block her, realizing that in the middle of betrayal, even small cruelties could sting the worst. Weeks blurred into a haze of calls, investigations, and sleepless nights. Detective Ramirez, assigned to financial fraud, came over one evening, a tall, sharp-eyed man who smelled faintly of tobacco and determination, and laid out the mess Tom had created: falsified contracts, fake LLCs, offshore transfers, even forged signatures to try to pull Lila into the scheme. "Your ex isn't just careless," he said, voice low and serious. "He's playing a dangerous game, and you've been his unknowing accomplices." I wanted to punch something, the wall, the phone, myself, and yet the detective's presence also gave me a strange flicker of hope. Someone else saw the storm I was in and was willing to fight it with me. Meanwhile, Lila's fiancé Marcus called almost nightly, apologizing, panicked over his part in the scam, desperate to make things right. I could hear the tremor in his voice and recognized it from my own experience, the fragile line between fear and guilt, and the terrible urge to fix something that may be irreparable. My emotions were a roller coaster: grief for the life we'd lost, fury at Tom, anxiety for Lila and Marcus, and a bitter sting of self-blame. But then, in between the chaos, came the smallest sparks of human resilience: Rosa, my neighbor, showing up with casseroles and listening without judgment; Darlene, an old friend from the flower shop, offering me work to tide me over; even Nancy, my estranged sister, texting out of nowhere to say, "You're stronger than you think, Evie." I didn't feel strong yet, but for the first time, I realized that maybe I didn't have to face the storm alone. But just as we began to breathe, another bomb dropped. Tom's mistress, audacious and cruel, emailed me a taunting screenshot of what she claimed were my bank account numbers and told me to be careful, the money isn't safe. My stomach dropped again, ball rising, panic clawing at my throat. I wanted to scream at her, to call the police, to collapse on the floor and cry until my bones ached. But instead, I opened my laptop, calmed my trembling hands, and thought, I can't let them break me. Not now. Not ever, I started a list, contacts, evidence, witnesses, accounts, everything, and began the painstaking process of rebuilding control. It was the hardest work I'd ever done, each day a battle between fear and determination, despair and the smallest glimmers of hope. But even in the darkness, there were flickers of light. Lila confided that she was pregnant, her voice soft, trembling with cautious joy, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold still. I realized then that the stakes weren't just about money or betrayal, they were about legacy, family, survival, and proving to ourselves that no one, not even a lifetime of lies, could steal our courage. By the time spring arrived, bruised but unbroken, I had filed reports, frozen accounts, traced scams, and even discovered that Angela had tried to sabotage me at work for personal gain, a revelation that nearly made me laugh through my tears. Every day, every revelation, every heartbreak became a test, a crucible forging a new version of me, wary, alert, resilient, and unwilling to be defeated again. And in the quiet moments, when the sun filtered through my curtains, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, the sensation that after enduring so much darkness, the first rays of a new life, perhaps even a second chance at happiness, were finally beginning to pierce through. Spring turned into a brutal, sun-scorched summer, and somehow, despite my resolve, the chaos only multiplied. One morning, as I sifted through another pile of overdue notices and bank alerts, I discovered an email from a company claiming I owed them nearly $25,000 in back taxes, a sum so absurd I thought it must be a cruel joke, yet the professional tone and official logos made my stomach twist, and I felt the old panic clawing back, sharp and unrelenting. I called the number, trying to steady my voice, and a man with a smooth, oily tone assured me it was urgent, that if I didn't pay immediately, legal action would begin. My pulse raced, sweat prickling my brow. I wanted to scream, but before I could, a memory of Tom flashed unbidden, the smug smirk, the way he had made me feel powerless. I took a deep breath and hung up, then called Detective Ramirez, who calmly explained it was a classic scam, probably tied to the same network that had sucked him dry. Relief mixed with rage, a toxic cocktail, and I realized I'd been living in constant high alert for months, walking a tightrope of fear. Meanwhile, Lila's pregnancy had progressed, but so had her anxiety. She refused to invest her engagement savings into Marcus's small startup, suspecting something shady, and her sudden mistrust mirrored my own paranoia. We spent long nights on video calls, whispering to each other about every suspicious email, every unexpected transfer, every gut-wrenching feeling that told us someone was out to destroy what little we had left. The house felt emptier than ever, haunted by memories of a marriage that had been a lie, with Tom's presence lingering like a shadow that refused to dissipate. Then came the day I received the first anonymous letter, hand-delivered, postmarked from a city hundreds of miles away, containing detailed financial records and threatening language, warning me to stop digging or face consequences. I froze, clutching the envelope, heart hammering, a cold fury rising. Who was watching us? Was Tom behind this, or someone else entirely? My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I wanted to run, hide, disappear, but something inside me snapped, would not be a victim any longer. With Detective Ramirez's guidance, I began tracing the origin, uncovering a network of fraudsters who had used Tom's naivety and my daughter's trusting nature as leverage. It was like peeling an onion, layer after layer of lies, deceit, and criminal cunning. Just as I started to feel a glimmer of control, life threw me another punch. Marcus's startup had been scammed out of nearly half its funds by a partner who vanished without a trace, leaving Lila in tears and guilt pressing her down like a vice. I held her, shushing her cries, trying to convince her that she had done nothing wrong, that the real villain wasn't her or Marcus but the predators who had preyed on our trust. I spent hours plotting a counter-strategy, consulting online forums for financial crime victims, contacting lawyers, even going to the local community center to seek advice from others who had faced fraud. Every interaction was a tiny victory, yet I felt battered, as if life had made a sport of testing my endurance. Then came the confrontation with Tom. I tracked him to a coffee shop downtown, the same place he had first whispered sweet lies to me decades ago, and there he was, smug, confident, as if nothing had changed. My legs trembled as I approached, but I forced myself to speak. "You've ruined lives," I said, voice quivering but steady. "And it ends now." He smiled, dismissive, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that I was overreacting, that Lila's entanglement was merely coincidence. Rage boiled through me, hot and unrelenting, and I realized I no longer needed his acknowledgement. I turned on my heel, walked out, and felt an unfamiliar surge of liberation. The chains of dependence and denial were finally snapping. But freedom was bittersweet. In the same week, I learned that Angela, my old coworker, had reported me to HR with falsified complaints about embezzlement, seemingly colluding with the scammers to discredit me. I was summoned, terrified, to explain discrepancies in my former company's financial records. Sitting across from HR, heart pounding, palms sweating, I laid everything bare: timelines, bank statements, correspondence, a meticulous unspooling of evidence. For the first time in years, I felt completely exposed, and yet strangely empowered. When they finally looked up, eyes wide, I realized that honesty, no matter how vulnerable, was my strongest weapon. The weeks dragged on, every day bringing a fresh challenge: Lila struggling with stress-induced migraines, Marcus nearly giving up on their dreams, neighbors whispering about our family misfortunes, and my own body aching from sleepless nights and constant vigilance. But amid the storm, moments of light pierced through: a letter from Rosa, offering to babysit Lila's unborn child so she could rest, Darlene inviting me to run a small pop-up flower booth in the city square, a tiny but potent reminder that I could rebuild not just financially but emotionally. Even a quiet morning spent in my backyard, watering plants and feeling dirt between my fingers, grounding me in the physical reality that no scam, no deceit, could touch. Then, as if fate itself enjoyed drama, I received a call from an unknown number, Detective Ramirez on the line, his voice low, urgent. "Evie," he said, "I've traced the offshore account back to a syndicate bigger than we imagined. They're dangerous. But we can catch them, and we can recover some of what was stolen. Are you ready?" My pulse surged, fear and excitement intermingling. I realized I had become part of something bigger, a real fight for justice, not just for myself but for my daughter, for Marcus, for every innocent person who had been manipulated and hurt. Over the next several days, I worked with Ramirez and his team, tracing transactions, setting traps, even confronting intermediaries in tense, cinematic moments that left my hands shaking and adrenaline coursing through me. There were nights I cried into the couch cushions, exhausted, and nights I celebrated small victories: a frozen account, a recovered check, a hacker exposed. Through it all, Lila and I grew closer, our bond tempered by adversity, her laughter, when it returned, like a balm to my weary soul. And then came the night of reckoning, a sting operation orchestrated by Ramirez, where we lured the syndicate into a trap. I was terrified, heart in my throat, as agents moved in, criminals fleeing, phones confiscated, ledgers seized. Standing there, amid flashing lights and chaos, I realized that I had survived not just financial ruin and betrayal, but my own doubt, my own fear, my own tendency to shrink from the world. And as I walked away from the scene, dust on my shoes, sweat on my brow, I felt the first real sense of cinematic triumph. Justice, messy and imperfect, had been served, and those scars remained, hope surged like a tide breaking through rock. Even after the syndicate was dismantled, the aftermath was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. The adrenaline faded, leaving only the weight of months of fear, betrayal, and relentless responsibility pressing on my chest, and I realized that surviving the storm didn't mean life became easy. It only meant I had to rebuild in a world still littered with shadows. Tom had vanished, as predicted, leaving nothing but empty threats and a trail of bitterness, and the law couldn't touch him for some of the smaller scams, which meant I carried fragments of anger and distrust like stones in my pockets. Lila, whose pregnancy was now showing, was a fragile mix of joy and apprehension. She confided one night that Marcus had admitted to lying about some debts he had hidden to protect her, and though small, the revelation shook her faith in people again. I held her tightly, whispering reassurances I didn't fully believe myself, wondering if the world would ever feel safe again. At the same time, my pop-up flower booth began to flourish, bringing unexpected connections and moments of levity. Strangers smiling at my bouquets, neighbors dropping by with coffees, and even a young couple asking for advice on a tiny garden for their apartment balcony, reminding me that life could still be tender, delicate, and surprisingly beautiful. But danger wasn't fully behind me. One evening, as I closed the booth, I noticed a dark sedan idling across the street. My pulse raced, memories of the syndicate's threats flashing in my mind. I ducked behind the stand, heart hammering, and felt that old familiar terror that had haunted months of my life. The car left, but the sense of being watched lingered, gnawing at me. I called Detective Ramirez immediately, who assured me it was likely unrelated, yet the unease remained. That same week, Lila and Marcus came to me with another shock. Marcus's estranged brother, a man rumored to have a gambling addiction, had tried to leverage Lila's trust to claim part of their savings, showing that even after we had dismantled one web of deceit, another had emerged. I felt my chest tighten, overwhelmed by a storm that seemed endless, but I reminded myself that I was no longer the frightened woman who had cowered at the first sign of trouble. I organized our finances meticulously, consulted lawyers, and made clear boundaries that no one, not even family, could cross without consequence. One afternoon, while sifting through old letters from Tom, I stumbled upon a small, handwritten note tucked in the back of a drawer, a relic from the early years of our marriage, proclaiming love and devotion in shaky cursive. I laughed bitterly at the irony, then burned it in the fireplace, feeling a weight lift as the smoke curled toward the ceiling, carrying decades of betrayal and heartbreak away. But life, as it always does, reminded me that joy and tragedy often arrive intertwined. Lila went into labor weeks early, and Marcus panicked, unsure how to navigate the hospital chaos. I found myself running from one wing to another, coordinating nurses, calming panicked family members, and holding Lila's hand as she screamed through contractions. When their daughter finally arrived, tiny and pink and screaming with raw vitality, I felt tears stream down my face, a mixture of relief, love, and the pure, untainted hope that maybe the next generation could inherit a world a little less cruel than ours. Amid the happiness, Angela resurfaced, attempting yet another scheme, this time filing a frivolous lawsuit claiming I had stolen corporate secrets from my former company, and I had to endure deposition after deposition, a grueling legal gauntlet that drained me physically and emotionally. Yet each time I felt myself faltering, I remembered Rosa, Darlene, and Detective Ramirez, people who had reminded me I wasn't alone, that resilience was built in the crucible of hardship. In the midst of legal battles, I discovered an unexpected ally in Marcus, his steady, pragmatic support during the depositions, his unwavering presence in Lila's pregnancy, and his gentle humor in moments of tension reminded me that trust, once earned, could still exist even after betrayal. Slowly, I began to realize that my identity was no longer tied to Tom or Angela or the criminals who had tried to ruin us. I was Evelyn Hart, woman of 55, survivor of countless storms, and mother, mentor, and friend capable of immense love and strength. There were still quiet nights when despair crept in, when I imagined Tom smiling somewhere in comfort while we struggled, when I wondered if the world's cruelty would ever truly end, but those nights were increasingly rare, punctuated instead by laughter in the kitchen with Lila, bedtime stories with our granddaughter, and the smell of fresh soil and blooms from the flower booth, which had grown into a small but profitable business that allowed me independence and dignity. Even the dark sedan that had once terrified me became a symbol of triumph. The first time I saw it idling again, I stepped outside without hesitation, met the driver's eyes, and smiled. They drove off, and I realized that I no longer lived in fear. In the end, it was the small victories, the recovery of stolen funds, the legal vindications, the laughter of my granddaughter, the quiet morning sipping coffee surrounded by flowers, that stitched together a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. Tom was gone, Angela's schemes had been thwarted, the syndicate dismantled, and Lila and Marcus were building a life rooted in honesty and love, cautious but unbroken. I even managed to take a small vacation, standing on the Atlantic coast, salt spray on my face, wind tangling my hair, and felt a serenity I hadn't known in decades. I understood then that closure wasn't a single, climactic moment. It was accumulation of survival, courage, hard work, and the willingness to open one's heart despite past betrayals. I had been forged in heartbreak, financial ruin, and deceit, but I emerged not as a victim, but as a woman strengthened by fire, capable of protecting her family, trusting cautiously, and finding beauty in fleeting, precious moments. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with amber and crimson, I held my granddaughter close, watched Lila smile beside me, and whispered a quiet vow, that no matter what storms came, I would meet them with eyes wide open, heart resilient, and hands ready to rebuild, for that was the measure of peace I had finally, hard-won, achieved. The months that followed were quieter but no less intense, the kind of slow-burning drama that movies rarely capture but life insists upon. Each day a careful negotiation between vigilance and hope, between the ghosts of betrayal and the fledgling joys of renewal. I had expanded the flower booth into a small storefront, a modest yet beautiful place I named Evelyn's Garden, where the scent of roses, lilacs, and fresh soil became a balm for both me and the customers who wandered in seeking beauty or solace. Every bouquet I arranged was a quiet act of reclamation, a reminder that I could create and nurture despite a past riddled with destruction. Lila's daughter, now a curious, lively toddler, had given me a sense of purpose that transcended financial struggle or lingering resentment toward Tom and the world. Each giggle, each tiny hand wrapped around my finger, felt like the universe whispering that life, even after the worst storms, could bloom again. But the universe, as ever, had more lessons for me. Just when I thought I could breathe, I discovered that one of Tom's offshore accounts had been reopened under a fake identity, a last-ditch attempt to launder money, which meant Detective Ramirez and I were pulled back into a tense, almost cinematic pursuit, tracing digital footprints, decoding encrypted messages, and coordinating with international authorities in long nights that left me physically and mentally exhausted. At first, I panicked, the old fear flaring in my chest, but then I remembered how far I'd come, how much I had survived. I coordinated with Ramirez and the FBI team, meticulously reviewing evidence, cross-referencing accounts, and watching the criminals' desperate attempts to evade justice. In those moments, I felt alive in a way that was raw and terrifying, the adrenaline a strange echo of the despair I had endured months earlier. Meanwhile, life's quieter dramas continued. Angela attempted yet another scheme, now targeting Lila's small inheritance, only to be thwarted again by the meticulous documentation I had kept. Her persistence was maddening, almost cinematic in its audacity, yet each failed attempt reinforced my confidence, a subtle but powerful victory. Marcus's business, rebuilt after the earlier scam, began to turn a profit, and together, he and Lila invited me to participate in small decisions, reminding me that trust, once shaken, could be carefully rebuilt, brick by brick. One rainy afternoon, as I sat in the storefront sipping tea, I received a call from Tom, the first in over a year, his voice dripping with arrogance, claiming he had changed and wanted to reconnect. I felt a brief, shocking flicker of emotion, anger, betrayal, sadness, and curiosity battling for dominance, but when I looked out at my flourishing flower shop, the laughter of customers, of the small, steady life I had built from ruin, I realized that whatever charm or power he once held over me was gone. I'm done, Tom, I said, voice calm but resolute, and hung up. That single act, small yet monumental, felt like severing the final tie to a life that had nearly destroyed me. Even Rosa and Darlene, who had been my quiet anchors through months of chaos, marveled at how far I had come. They became frequent fixtures in the shop, helping arrange flowers, offering companionship, and reminding me that chosen family could sometimes be more steadfast than blood. Lila and Marcus married in a small, intimate ceremony in our backyard, under a canopy of roses and fairy lights, their daughter toddling at our feet. I gave the toast, my voice strong despite the tears, speaking of resilience, love, and the quiet triumph of rebuilding in the face of betrayal. And finally, after years of financial chaos, legal battles, and near-constant vigilance, we recovered a portion of Tom's misappropriated funds through international cooperation, enough to pay off lingering debts, secure Lila's future, and fund the expansion of Evelyn's garden into a modest, community-centered space where workshops, small markets, and charity events could flourish. In the quiet moments that followed, as I walked among the roses, pruning branches, inhaling their scent, I felt a deep, abiding sense of peace. Scars remained, memories of betrayal lingered, but they no longer held power over me. Life, in all its messy, beautiful, and occasionally cruel ways, had shown me that heartbreak could be survived, deception could be exposed, and even the most relentless storms could give way to calm. And as the sun set behind the storefront, casting a golden glow over petals and soil, I knew, truly knew, that I had not only survived but had forged a life of my own choosing, a life rich with love, trust, and quiet joy, a life that Tom, Angela, and every schemer who had tried to diminish me could never touch. I was Evelyn Hart, battered, bruised, wiser, and at last, at peace. Even as life seemed to settle into a tentative rhythm, the past had a way of sneaking in, reminding me that closure was never absolute, only hard-won and temporary. One crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived in the mail with no return address, postmarked from a city I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I tore it open, expecting threats, scams, or some lingering echo of Tom's manipulations, but instead, it contained a single photograph, a younger version of me, smiling beside Tom in happier times, and a brief note scrawled in shaky handwriting, *, some truths never die. *, I felt my chest tighten, a knot of fear and unresolved grief forming, and for a moment, I wondered if my past would ever truly release me. Lila noticed my pale face and took my hand, concern in her eyes, and I realized that my daughter's unwavering presence had become the anchor that kept me from spiraling back into panic. That evening, Marcus suggested we meet with a private investigator to ensure that no remnants of Tom's schemes could reach us again, and though it felt like a small betrayal to admit we might still be vulnerable, I agreed, a reminder that vigilance was part of surviving, and survival had become second nature. Meanwhile, the flower shop began attracting unusual attention. A local journalist wanted to feature Evelyn's garden as a story of resilience and community, shining a light on how someone could recover from both personal and financial catastrophe. I hesitated, worried that public attention might bring unwanted scrutiny or even jealousy from those who had tried to hurt us, but Rosa convinced me that this could be a chance not only to celebrate survival but to inspire others. The article went live, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers who had faced fraud, betrayal, or financial ruin, thanking me for sharing my story, and for the first time, I felt that my struggles, as harrowing as they had been, could serve a purpose beyond my own survival. Life, however, had a way of balancing triumph with tragedy. One evening, Darlene called in a panic. Her husband had been in a serious car accident, leaving her struggling to care for their children while managing mounting hospital bills. Without hesitation, I offered the flower shop as a safe haven for Darlene's kids, even taking on additional responsibilities to help ease her burden, and through that experience, I realized that hardship could sometimes become a bridge to deeper human connection, reminding me that empathy and action were forms of power. In the midst of helping Darlene, a financial twist arose. The bank mistakenly froze my personal account due to an error linked to Tom's offshore dealings, leaving me temporarily unable to pay suppliers or staff. Panic surged briefly, memories of past financial despair clawing at me, but this time I faced it differently, calling the bank, presenting meticulous documentation, and refusing to let fear dictate my actions. By the end of the day, the mistake was resolved, and I felt a quiet triumph. Small, mundane victories like this now carried immense emotional weight because I had learned to navigate chaos without losing myself. Even Lila and Marcus faced new drama. Marcus's brother, the same one who had tried to exploit their finances before, resurfaced yet again, claiming he needed funds for a medical emergency, presenting fake documentation, and stirring anxiety in Lila that echoed my own past fears. We confronted him together, gathering evidence, refusing to be manipulated, and when he finally left in defeat, I felt the surge of protective power that only a mother and a grandmother could wield, a fierce, unbreakable strength that had been forged through every betrayal, scam, and heartbreak I had endured. On a more personal level, I began to confront the emotional residue left by Tom, the loneliness, the doubt, the creeping sense that I had wasted decades, and in quiet moments, I wrote letters I never sent, speaking directly to my past self, my fears, and even to Tom, pouring all the raw, unfiltered truth onto paper. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to externalize pain, and through it, I discovered a latent resilience I hadn't fully acknowledged, the ability not just to survive but to process, understand, and ultimately forgive, not him, but myself, for allowing anyone to have such power over my life. Rosa and Darlene encouraged me to start a small online blog to share my experiences, and surprisingly, it flourished. People wrote to me about bankruptcy, divorce, financial scams, and personal heartbreak, and I responded, sharing strategies, emotional insights, and, most importantly, hope. This small digital community became an unexpected extension of the support I had found in real life, reinforcing the notion that adversity, once faced and processed, could become a platform for connection and empowerment. And yet, life was not without its darker cinematic turns. One night, returning home from the flower shop, I noticed shadows moving near the garage. My heart skipped, panic rising as memories of past stalkers and scammers surged, but I approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, only to find an elderly man, shaking, lost, and looking for directions. I guided him inside, offered tea, and listened to his story. He had recently escaped a nursing facility that had been exploiting residents financially, and he had nowhere else to go. Helping him reminded me that tragedy often existed quietly, unnoticed, and that even small acts of courage and kindness could ripple outward, changing lives in ways unseen. Throughout all this, Lila's pregnancy progressed, Marcus's business stabilized, and my flower shop thrived, yet I knew life could still surprise. A sudden fire at a nearby restaurant threatened to engulf our block, and while our shop was saved, the incident reminded me how fragile security could be, how quickly disaster could return. I rallied neighbors, helped salvage what we could, and for the first time in years, I saw a community acting in unison, a stark contrast to the isolation and betrayal that had once defined my life. The final months of the year brought a sense of cinematic closure that I had long craved. Lila gave birth to a healthy, joyous second child, adding even more laughter and life to our household. Marcus proposed expanding the business together, envisioning community classes and small workshops that would not only grow Evelyn's garden but provide support and empowerment for others in financial or emotional crisis. Angela disappeared from our lives entirely after legal action left her bankrupt and publicly disgraced, her repeated attempts at manipulation finally exhausted. And as the first snow fell outside my storefront, covering the streets in a quiet white blanket, I walked among my flowers one last time before closing for the evening, inhaling the crisp air and reflecting on the long, harrowing, yet beautiful journey I had undertaken. I had faced heartbreak, betrayal, financial ruin, scams, near constant fear, and countless personal dramas, yet through it all, I had learned that resilience, love, and careful courage could transform suffering into strength, fear into action, and despair into hope. In that snowy stillness, surrounded by the blooms I had nurtured with my own hands, I understood, not as a cliché, not as a fleeting sentiment, but as a hard-earned truth, that I had arrived at peace, carrying scars but also triumphs, lessons but also love, and a newfound capacity to face whatever storms might still come with grace, wisdom, and unshakable strength. Spring arrived, bringing with it both renewal and unexpected drama that reminded me how unpredictably life could unfold, even after years of careful rebuilding. One morning, as I unlocked the door to Evelyn's garden, I found a small envelope tucked under the welcome mat, postmarked from an address I didn't recognize. My heart skipped, fear flaring momentarily. Old habits die hard, but when I opened it, I found a handwritten apology from a distant relative of Tom's, someone I had never met, acknowledging the years of deceit and offering restitution for assets that had been wrongfully taken from me. The gesture was small in monetary value but immense in emotional weight. I sat on the stoop, letting tears of relief and vindication slide silently down my cheeks. That same week, I faced another kind of betrayal. A trusted employee, someone I had hired during the chaos of expansion, attempted to siphon funds and manipulate orders for personal gain. The shock was visceral. I had believed I could trust again, that my hard-won security was safe. But my response was markedly different from my past reactions. I confronted the employee directly, presented evidence, and terminated the arrangement without hesitation, a mixture of fury and pride flooding through me. I realized then that survival had not just taught me to endure, but to protect what I had built fiercely and wisely. Lila's children became my constant joy and grounding force, their laughter filling spaces in the shop and our home, healing fractures I hadn't realized remained. Marcus's steady presence, once tinged with the caution of past betrayals, now radiated a calm confidence, a quiet stability that allowed me to lean on him without fear. Even Rosa and Darlene, who had become like sisters to me, continued to remind me that community, chosen family, could offer sanctuary, humor, and a shared strength that blood relations sometimes failed to provide. Just as the months seemed to smooth into routine, a sudden twist threatened to undo the equilibrium I had fought so hard to achieve. Tom, somehow re-emerging from a legal limbo, attempted to contact Lila directly, sending letters and even showing up near her workplace. Panic surged through me like a physical wave, memories of betrayal, financial ruin, and fear returning with vivid clarity. I called Detective Ramirez, who assured me that Tom could face charges for harassment, but the psychological impact lingered. Lila and Marcus reassured me, though, reminding me that we were no longer helpless, that the law, coupled with our vigilance, gave us protection. We coordinated a formal restraining order, and through careful planning, the threat was neutralized, yet it marked the final chapter of Tom's intrusion into our lives, a cinematic showdown that felt oddly satisfying in its mundane bureaucracy. Amid these dramatic confrontations, I found moments of exquisite peace. One sunny afternoon, while arranging a new shipment of tulips and daffodils, I looked out at the small crowd gathering in front of the shop for a community planting event, smiling and chatting as neighbors planted flowers and shared stories. I realized then that Evelyn's garden had become more than a business. It was a symbol of resilience, of beauty emerging from chaos, a tangible manifestation of the life I had reclaimed. Marcus and Lila's family grew stronger with each passing day, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude that, despite everything, we had managed to construct a life of honesty, connection, and joy. The legal victories, financial recoveries, and thwarted schemes were all markers of triumph, but the quiet moments, the smell of fresh soil, the laughter of children, the warmth of a friend's hand on mine, were the true measures of peace. There were still small challenges, minor misunderstandings, and financial juggling, but each was met with patience, foresight, and the unshakable knowledge that we were no longer victims but architects of our own lives. One evening, as the sky blushed pink and orange with sunset, I sat on the stoop with a cup of tea, watching my granddaughter chase fireflies and laughing as Lila and Marcus worked side by side in the flower beds, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and release. The storms of the past, the scams, Tom's betrayal, Angela's schemes, financial collapse, had not broken me, they had forged me, tempered me, and taught me the power of resilience, careful trust, and love. I allowed myself, finally, to imagine a future untethered from fear, one where joy was not fleeting, but steady, cultivated like the blooms surrounding me. Rosa stopped by, her arm linked with mine, and we shared a quiet smile, the kind that spoke volumes, of survival, friendship, and the hard-won beauty of enduring life's harshest trials. As night fell, the streetlights flickered on, illuminating the soft petals of tulips swaying in the breeze, and I understood, deeply and irrevocably, that peace was not the absence of hardship, but the mastery of it, not the erasure of pain, but the ability to carry scars with grace, to open one's heart despite them, and to nurture life, family, friends, and even oneself, in the wake of chaos. And with that understanding, I closed the shop for the night, locking the door not as a gesture of fear, but as an emblem of safety, stability, and hard-won triumph, whispering to myself that whatever storms may still come, I was ready, and I was finally, unequivocally at peace. Summer arrived in a blaze of color, the streets lined with blooms from Evelyn's garden, and I felt an unshakable sense of belonging that I had longed for throughout the chaos of the past few years. The shop had become a hub for neighbors, friends, and even strangers, each drawn by the flowers but staying for the warmth, the laughter, and the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from within me. Lila and Marcus thrived not just as partners but as pillars of our renewed family life, and watching them navigate parenthood with love and patience reminded me how resilience could ripple outward, shaping not only our own lives but those around us. There were minor challenges, of course. Suppliers occasionally delayed shipments, a sudden summer storm flooded part of the courtyard, and small misunderstandings flared between staff, but none of these moments carried the weight of past betrayals. Now, they were mere bumps in the road, handled with calm, experience, and a collective spirit that had been forged in adversity. One afternoon, as I arranged a new shipment of sunflowers, I noticed a young woman hesitating near the doorway, clutching a small bouquet as if it were a lifeline. I smiled and beckoned her inside, and she explained that she had recently lost her job, had been scammed online, and felt as though the world was closing in on her. Her eyes mirrored the fear and exhaustion I had once known intimately, and without thinking, I offered her a temporary position helping with the flowers, showing her the rhythms of the shop, and, most importantly, reminding her that she could rebuild. Over the following weeks, she blossomed, her laughter returning, her confidence growing, and I realized that my own journey, the heartbreak, the scams, the betrayals, the near destruction, had equipped me to help others rise from the same depths. Marcus and Lila proposed expanding the shop into a small community center for workshops on resilience, financial literacy, and emotional wellness, and I felt a surge of pride as I saw the seeds of transformation taking root not only in flowers but in lives. Even Angela, whose presence had haunted so many chapters of my story, finally faded from our lives entirely, her attempts at manipulation thwarted and her path diverging into obscurity. The satisfaction of justice, tempered with the grace of distance, brought a quiet smile to my face. The crowning moment, however, came one golden evening when the entire neighborhood gathered for a small festival in front of the shop, music, laughter, children running through sprinklers, and tables covered with blooms and homemade treats. I stood with Rosa and Darlene, watching the joy ripple outward, and realized that this community, this resilience, this beauty born from chaos, was the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. I thought of Tom, of the debt, of every scam, of the sleepless nights spent questioning whether survival was even possible, and I understood that all of it, every heartbreak, betrayal, and trial, had led me here. I had endured not simply to exist, but to transform, to nurture life, and to create a legacy of hope and perseverance. That night, as the festival lights glimmered across the shop, I found a quiet moment alone in the back courtyard, inhaling the scent of roses and lavender, listening to the hum of contentment around me, and felt a peace so profound it nearly brought me to tears. I had survived the storms, uncovered courage I didn't know I possessed, and rebuilt a life that was not just safe but vibrant, full of laughter, love, and possibility. Evelyn Hart, once battered and betrayed, now stood whole, not despite her scars but because of them, each one a testament to the power of resilience and the beauty of a life reclaimed. As I closed my eyes that night, the warm summer air brushing against my face, I whispered a simple truth to myself, that I was free, that I was loved, and that whatever came next, I would meet it not with fear but with strength, wisdom, and the unshakable knowledge that even after heartbreak, even after betrayal, life could bloom again. And with that, I felt a final, deep, unshakable sense of closure, the kind that movies often promise but reality rarely delivers, a life restored, a heart healed, and a future rich with hope, love, and endless possibility. For more gripping tales like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.